Hello and welcome back to everyone that's tuned into the American Ultra Stock channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. And again, huge thank you to every single one of you that watches the channel. Even if you're not subscribed, you helped us reach the huge milestone for us of over 1,000 subs. We really appreciate that. Stay tuned for the summer. Should be a action-packed summer ahead. And as you see on my background, today's topic, the roster, well, a preliminary roster, it's not the final one for the Olympics yet, has dropped. As you can see on the screen, the players that got called up. We're going to give our analysis, our takes on the players. There are a few snubs here and there, but overall, I think a pretty solid one. Starting with the goalkeepers, Braden, are you happy with Schulte and Gaga being called up? I think this one's the most direct one.
Yeah, I think it is also the most straightforward one. And I just want to reiterate, thank you guys so much. 1,000 subscribers is an incredible milestone, a huge one for us. It's only just the beginning as well. Like Yuri said, this summer is going to be a huge one. We'll be uploading or streaming almost every day, so stay tuned. We have so much content coming out for you guys from Copa America, the Euros, Olympics, U20 Championship, everything. So stay tuned for all that. But diving into this roster here, like you said, the goalkeepers, it's very straightforward. It's been a three-man process, well, maybe four for the whole time. John Pulskamp from Sporting Kansas City was in there initially in the first two camps back in 2023, but he's been out of it since then, I think very comfortably. I don't know why he was involved in the first place, to be brutally honest, but it seems to have come down to three: Gaga Slonina and Patrick Schulte, who made this roster, and then Chris Brady from the Chicago Fire, who did not make this roster. I do think it's a little odd that he isn't here, especially since if you look at the rest of the roster, it's 25 players. If you add him in, that's 26. It's basically not necessarily a Copa America B team because there's a lot of overage guys that could make that as well. But it's essentially the 26-man roster for the Olympics. We all know that it's going to be 18 for the final one, which horrible format. I don't know why you're doing that to the players. But the other thing is there's going to be 4 alternates that also travel with the team that can make the matchday squad. If someone gets injured and has to go home because of that, they can come in, which means more than likely that there will be 3 goalkeepers traveling to Paris. But you would assume that Chris Brady would be that alternate. So, but maybe there was a release issue with the Chicago Fire. In fairness to them, having him go and not play in Paris doesn't make a lot of sense to them from a club perspective. But regardless of that, I have Gaga and Schulte ahead of him in my depth chart anyways, so I don't have any problems with this position group.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be the first time that the Fire holds out on a player from being called up, which I think deteriorated. Maybe later down the list we'll talk about Gutierrez. But now moving on to the defenders, we have, well, Nathan Harriel, who scored a goal, actually a header in a friendly in that last camp that we had. We have Jalen Neal back included with the squad, Brian Reynolds, John Tolkien, Tompkinson, Wiley, and Zimmerman, who for some it's a surprise inclusion. We kind of had it in mind that it would likely be him. Added some much needed experience in that back line in a position that I think we're the most vulnerable. Do you think anyone that is not here should have been included, Braden? What do you think? Are you happy with these players?
I think that the biggest talking point from this position group, and I think this kind of goes with the whole roster in general, is not just Walker Zimmerman being included, but the fact that he is the only overage player included here, which I don't think it shows for certain that only one overage player will be used for the Olympics. That would be a disastrous decision if that were to happen. I think it's mainly because, and Marko Mitrovic did say this as well, that the Copa America roster is still being finalized. There's going to be a lot of trickle-down effects, including potentially who doesn't get as many minutes as they would have liked to there. There's still a couple of players that weren't mentioned specifically. Pepe and Miles Robinson, I think, were the main ones that were mentioned. Today it came out as we record this that Miles Robinson is becoming a favorite to be at the Olympics, which personally I think is ridiculous to have them at both tournaments instead of calling someone like Trusty, who would, but in that situation, just be sitting at home the entire summer, I think would be an outrage and a disgrace, in all honesty. But if that were to happen, it's all going to come down to the Copa America roster, how much these players play. If Pepe gets little to no minutes at Copa, maybe PSV think it's worth it to release him for the Olympics, stuff like that. He's not an overage player, but it would impact potentially having to bring an overage striker. So the Copa roster has a lot of impacts on that, and we know Walker Zimmerman was going to be with the Olympics regardless. He wasn't going to be with Copa, so it makes sense to have him here. He's probably going to be the captain for the team in Paris, which makes sense. He brings a lot of leadership that, I mean, from a U23 guys, you don't really have a lot of that. Tessman and Busia were kind of alternating the captainship, but realistically, I think it's better to have someone like Zimmerman come in and take that role. I think it's very unfortunate for Maxi Dietz from Greuther Fürth that he is injured here, because this is the final preparation camp. And I'll use a quote from Mitrovic here. He was talking about Diego Luna, who we'll get to later down the line. But he did say that just because someone isn't here doesn't mean that they're completely cut off from the Olympics, which could work in Dietz's favor as well, because I think out of the age-eligible players, I would personally take him as our number one center back. A lot of people would take Jalen Neal, who's also at this camp, and I think that's fair as well. But I don't think there's any debate that he's ahead of Jonathan Tompkinson, if healthy, who is the other center back that's age-eligible at this camp. I don't even know why he's here instead of George Campbell, to be honest. I think Campbell has been better for club and country, so a bit of an interesting decision there. But ultimately, I don't think it'll matter because he'll get cut. I mentioned Jalen Neal. It's nice to see him finally here. This is his first camp with the U23s because of the injury that kept him out for a lot longer than we would have liked. But he's back playing for the Galaxy now. He's started a couple of games, come off the bench in a couple others, and this is going to be a big test to see how match fit and how ready he really is. I expect him to probably be at the Olympics regardless, but with Dietz coming back and a potential second overage center back, you never really know. So he's going to have to impress. As for the fullbacks, I'll keep it very short. This is the exact group I expected here. It's been these four the entire process. One of them will probably get cut for the final roster, especially since Kevin Paredes, one of the wingers, can also play as a left back. So I'm anticipating it'll probably be between Tolkien or Wiley to get cut, but it could also be Harriel, who knows. Reynolds is really the only lock out of this group, but these have been the four the entire process. It's going to stay the four until the final decision where one of them gets cut.
Yeah, and some people were vocal about Jonathan Gomez not making this roster. Honestly, he wasn't called up in the previous camps, and I actually anticipate for Harriet to be cut. Even though I wouldn't personally cut him, I think that's what they would likely go with if one of the fullbacks is cut, which I think it's probable. And that brings us to the best position that we have. I think it's the one that we're most stacked, is the one where people can point to Gutierrez or Diego Luna as being snubbed. I saw some people talking about Maloney, that he should be included here as well. I can see the reason behind that, but I don't really think that it was ever going to happen. Now, here we have Cole Bassett, a nice inclusion, Gianluca Buzio, Benjamin Kremaski, Jack McGlynn, Aidan Morris, Rockus Pukstas back included as well, and Tanner Tesman, who in my opinion is the best center midfielder in the world. I'm just kidding, obviously, but I think it's a really solid group. Really happy. I think that this is where the core of the team is. I expect Tesman to start. I will be honest, I thought that McGlynn looked better alongside Tesman and Morris when he came on against France than Buzio, but we know that Buzio is likely a lock for this one. Are you happy with this group of players? Would you have called up any of the other guys that were left out, Braden?
Like you said, this is an absolutely loaded group, including some of the players that didn't make it as well. We'll start with the obvious ones, the locks. Tesman, Aidan Morris, Jack McGlynn, and Gianluca Buzio, I think, have all been locks the entire process. I've seen a couple people leaving Buzio in particular out of their final Olympic teams, which is fair to say. There's a lot of competition, but I think I think he's a lock for USSF and for Mitrovic, especially considering that he said that the confirmation that I think some of us had already thought that the friendly against Japan in Kansas City is because of Buzio. We all know he came up through Sporting Kansas City. And so I think that just shows how highly they rate him and how key they think he is to this team. For better or for worse, I think he's deserved a spot here through his play this season at Venezia alongside Tesman, and that's an added bonus as well. When you have two players playing together at the club level that can bring some of the chemistry, that's a big thing, because a lot of these players, we've only had 3 camps prior to this, and they've been very spread out. So a lot of these players, including some of the new ones like Rockus Pukstas, for example, haven't gotten to play with this whole squad. And especially since we only have 1 friendly this camp, which I think is outrageous, considering that there's a 25-man squad and there's going to be a lot of cuts. I don't think there's anywhere we can see as much as we would like from some of these players, especially not all of them. But with only 1 game this camp and limited games the entire cycle, having 2 players that have been playing together for such a long time that have the chemistry is very important. So like you said, I think Buzio will start. The other 3, I mentioned Rockus Pukstas. I've been a big fan of Cole Bassett this entire process. I think he's been incredible in MLS since returning from his failed stint in the Eredivisie, which some people point to a reason why he shouldn't be here. I don't think that has any impact whatsoever. He did fail. Yes, it was a bad stint, but it was also a learning experience. He learned from that. He grew. He came back to MLS. He's been better than ever. And that's in the past now. We have to look forward to the future, where I think he'll return to Europe at some point and most likely have a much better stint there than he did the first time. So I think it's very warranted to have him here, at least in the preparation camp. Whether or not he makes the final roster, it's probably an uphill battle. And then Benjamin Kremeski is back here. He was in, I think, the first camp, maybe the first two, ended up getting injured, unfortunately, missed the last one. But he is back now. Personally, I'd rather him just be with the U20s this summer and the U20 CONCACAF Championship, because he is eligible. He'd likely be one of the best players in that age group, along with a couple other guys that we'll talk about a little bit later. But I think at the end of the day, these three players that I mentioned, Fuxtas, Bassa, and Kremeski, are all fighting for one spot, that 10 spot. And it's interesting because we'll see Paxton Aronson in the forwards group. I think he's the number 10 for this team, but they've had him as a forward for at least this camp now. So I think maybe he's competing for a winger spot. I think these three midfielders, maybe Paxton thrown in there as well, are competing for that fifth and final midfield spot. It'll just be interesting to see who ends up finally getting it and who impresses against Japan.
Yeah, I will give some hot takes right here in this group. I think that even though I like Paxton in the middle, I thought that against France he did really well, and it worked when he was playing as a winger. I think that he created two really good chances, played well, and the transition was really good when he dropped, still in the wing, but dropped deep to combine with Tolkien, although Tolkien had a bad game that day. But I think that it worked. So I kind of see why they put him in the forward position right here. I think it makes more sense than when they put his brother in the forwards position with the 18. But here, I would just say I would rather have Cole Bassett than Gianluca Busio at this group. I 100% would. I think that he's the better player. And if people want to point out to Bassett's season in the Netherlands, saying that it was a failure, let me tell you, it was a way less of a failure than it was Busio's last season with Venezia, getting dropped for a reason. And this year, yes, he has played better, but I think that all in all, player for player, if I had to choose one, I'll take Bassett and leave Busio at home. I know it's a crazy take, but I've watched Busio every game basically for the past 3-4 years, and I honestly don't think that he's a better player than Bassett. I think that he will cost us in the Olympics. I think he's a good player, but the mentality, it's very frail at times, and against France it cost us, and it's the reason why I would even have McGlynn ahead of him to start. I thought that we looked a lot better when we had a trio of Desmond Morris, McGlynn. But moving on to the forwards, this is a position where if we're going to classify Gutierrez as a winger, he's probably the only snub. Some people put Luna here as well. But we have Paxton Aronson, as previously mentioned, Esmir Bajraktarevic, which is a nice one. I think that's more for experience. Taylor Booth back in the mix. Kate Cowell, Damian Downs, which is a surprise inclusion right here, a pleasant surprise. Johan Gomez, Duncan Maguire, Kevin Paredes, and Griffin Yao. And in my opinion, it's one of the spines of this age group right here. Did really well against France. I think this is the most competed for position on the pitch. We have a lot of guys here that have a lot of quality. It can come down to personal preference on how we play. So who, honestly, out of this group, who would you take, Brayden? Are you happy with these guys being called up? Any notorious misses that you think were snubbed?
I'll start with J.O. Luna and Brian Gutierrez because they didn't make this. They could be in the midfielder group. They could be in the winger group, similar to Paxton Aronson. And I think Taylor Booth as well, you could make the argument for, although he's been a forward basically his entire time for the USMNT and the US youth national teams as well. I think Luna not being here is an absolute disgrace. I'll just say that right now. And it was confirmed that it was not a release issue. RSL fully expect, and I probably still maybe expect him to be at the Olympics this summer. So his inclusion was a shock to them. His lack of inclusion, I'll say, was a shock to them. It was a shock to us as fans, and probably a shock to Diego as well. And I think the fact that some players like Cade Cowell and even Esmir Bajraktarevic are here over him, it doesn't really make sense. Cowell, I'll just get straight to the point. I don't rate him at all. I think he's a youth national team merchant, which I guess you could argue the Olympics is a youth tournament. But with the overage players likely coming in at the center back position, I know they will for us and probably for a lot of other countries as well as they look to solidify their back line, because we all know alongside goalkeepers, center backs are the position that develop the slowest later on in their careers. So it makes sense to bring the experience at the back, and I don't think Cowell will be able to handle that. Esmir is a very good and a very exciting player, but he's another one like Kremeski that I think should stay with the U20s. Him and Kremeski would be probably the two leaders of that team this summer, and I think with them there's no doubt in my mind that we would 100% win that tournament, which we should be doing regardless, but having them there is a huge help. And I think ultimately, if Esmir does end up making the Olympic roster, he's not even going to play too much, which I don't think he'll make it regardless. Like you said, there's a lot of competition here, even with the guys who weren't included. Like I mentioned when I was talking about Dietz, Luna could still make the final roster for the Olympics, but I think it's a huge uphill battle for him. That the fact that he's not been preferred to 6, 7 even wingers that are in this camp, it's not a good sign for him. And it's just such a shame because he brings something that no one else in the entire player pool, senior or youth, brings with his unpredictability factor. Just the way he plays is so unique. And I think you need one wild card player like that at every tournament, especially at this level. So it's a shame that he might not be there. It's a huge shame that he's not here for this game against Japan. But into the ones that I'm happy about, Paxton being here is a big win for me. Like I said, I think he is our best number 10. Whether he plays there on the wing remains to be seen. Paredes and Yao are the spine of this team, I think, for the wingers, although maybe Paredes will play left back a little bit. I think they're the two first names on the roster board for this position group. And then Taylor Booth in there as well, returning from injury for Utrecht. Unfortunately, he didn't help them qualify for Europe next season, but maybe the lack of extra games will be a help for him because we know he's struggled with injuries this season and with a lot of fixture congestion that can happen as well. Hopefully he makes the final roster. I think when he isn't injured, when he's healthy, he's one of the best players in this age group period, but he's struggled with a lot of injury problems, like I said, so maybe they've been impacting his play at club level. Maybe they'll impact his play at national team as well. So it just remains to be seen. And then for the strikers, it's pretty straightforward. Besides Damian Downs, who I'm very happy to see him here. I think he's deserved a chance for a couple camps now. And it's nice to finally see him rewarded after his pretty solid play in the Bundesliga off the bench, scoring a couple of goals, including one that was crucial at the time, ended up not being so crucial because Cologne did unfortunately get relegated anyway. But it was a big goal in a big game, and it showed that he has the clutch factor. If you sub him on in the last couple of minutes, he has the ability to make a difference and score a crucial goal to win the game or get a result that we need. So I think it's nice to see him here, like Griffin Yao in the previous camp, and like Pukstas and Neil as well for this one. He only has one chance really to cement himself in this roster, and it's a huge uphill battle because like we've been mentioning this entire process, one of the overage spots will likely be used as a striker, and if not, that spot will go to Pepe, not as an overage player, but he'll be there. So I think it's likely that one of the A-team guys comes in, which means only one age-eligible player from this group will be there. It's likely Duncan Maguire. Johan Gomez has been in the mix the entire time. He's in this camp too, but I think everyone collectively rates Maguire ahead of Gomez, at least as USSF. I think he's a better player. Gomez maybe brings more to the attack, but overall, if you want someone to score a goal, I'm taking Maguire. I'd love to see Downs get a chance, but this is part of the problem with only having one friendly. With 3 strikers and only 90 minutes, it really limits the impact that players can have. I hope Mitrovic gives priority to Downs and like Pukstas and Neil as well in the other position groups because they haven't been with this group and it's really their chance to prove themselves. Maguire and Gomez have already had 3 camps to do that, but I fear that it'll probably be Maguire to start, Gomez off the bench. Maybe Downs is just there for the experience. But overall, I'm pretty happy with this roster. A few notable snubs and a couple players that I don't think should be here, but it's a very big group. There's still a lot of cuts to be made. We'll see that, and it'll make it as unpredictable as ever. But overall, I think a pretty solid and very deep roster.
Yeah, and on that note, I would just like to say, I think that Esmir Bajraktarevic being included right here is probably a reward for his performance against France. I thought he was really good, and against Guinea as well. I thought he didn't look out of place at all. Was really close to scoring a goal that maybe would put him in contention to actually being called up. I think that USSF, I would like to imagine they're playing the long game right here. We're just getting him acclimated with players that are above his age group so he can play really well with the U20s as well, be a pillar for the program going forward. I think that they see that in him. I think that Greg has showed that when he got called up before even playing pro. So I think so I have no issues with him being here. Similar to Kramaski, I don't realistically expect him to make the roster. I think that especially the way that Mitrovic likes us to play, I don't think that he will start. But I would just like to say Duncan Maguire, in my opinion, is maybe fighting for his spot because similar to Tomkinson, who I think that shouldn't really be included here, seems to be really liked. It was mentioned on their little pre-match routines that he's one of the guys that everyone likes over there. So, and also seems to do really well with all the guys, a lot of communication during the game. I think that Maguire doesn't have that and Gomez does. And he looked really awful against France. I would just say that Gomez, someone commented as well on the strikers tier list that we made. They had Gomez ahead of Maguire just based on that game. That's a little bit unfair, but I think that Maguire should be really, really watching out during this camp because, like you said, if not an overage player, Pepe would be included right here. And that brings me to the final part of the video and a question to you, Braden. Which two other players would you call up that are overage right here? Your choice completely. Who would it be? Realistic, obviously, but I know you'd do that.
Yeah, and just to clarify for you guys, he's saying two because Walker Zimmerman, he's the only overage player at this camp. It's a lock that he'll be at the Olympics, and I don't think that's a bad thing or anything. I think having one player there that may not have a future with the USMNT, but can provide good leadership is a valuable thing to have. So I'm not mad at all that Zimmerman is here. I just hope that for the other spot, they don't bring someone like John Brooks, who, with all due respect to him and his career that he's had, doesn't have a future with the USMNT. For better or for worse, you can make the argument that maybe he deserves it. He's been blackmailed out by Greg, but I think regardless, he's past the level anyway, and he's getting up there in age. He'll be a free agent. There's doubts around his future in the pro level entirely. We'll see what his next club is. I think Austin Trusty should absolutely be the second player. I think we've all been in agreement, not just us, but every U.S. soccer fan has been in agreement that two overage center backs are necessary for this roster just due to the lack of depth. And like I said earlier, center backs take a little bit longer to develop properly than other positions, especially forwards and midfielders. So I think having two players who are a little bit more experienced at the pro level, like Walker and like Austin Trusty, is a valuable thing to have. If it is Miles Robinson, like some of the rumors have been saying, and if he really is at both tournaments and Trusty's at 0, there's something serious going on at USSF. I don't know why he deserves that. You can make the argument that he deserves the Copa spot. That's fine by me. I think him and Trusty and McKenzie, those three are kind of battling it out for those final 1 or 2 spots. And it's not egregious to say he deserves the spot in the Copa roster, but to have him play both tournaments, especially considering that he plays in MLS. The MLS season is in full swing right now, and the Leagues Cup will be happening right when the Olympics do. So to have him miss all that time at 2 different international tournaments, I don't think FC Cincinnati would be happy with that. And for MLS in general, I mean, he's one of the faces of the league as a USMNT player. He's one of the rare cases within the league of a player that actually does represent the national team, especially since a lot of them have now moved on to Europe. So I don't think MLS and FC Cincinnati in particular would be too happy with him representing the national team in 2 different tournaments, missing all those games. So I think just for logic's sake, it makes so much more sense to bring Trusty to this tournament. To have a left-footed center back as well is another big thing. And then for the final spot, I would bring Brendan Vasquez. Now, if Pepe does go, that opens up a spot, which maybe you give it to a player who said that they want to be here, like a Pulisic, which would be a huge one to have to the winger group, add the experience, add the quality that we all know he has. Or maybe it's someone like Alejandro Zendejas, who has had an incredible season at Club America, winning the double in Liga MX, and I think he deserves some sort of recognition because he wasn't in the Copa roster, but maybe having him here as an overage player, if we do get Pepe for the striker spot, would be nice.
Nice. Yeah, my picks would be, like you said, another center back. I'm fine with Trusty. I'm actually fine with Miles too. I'm actually more okay with Miles being here than in Copa America because I think that for this level, he would do better. I think he's a good center back still, but I wouldn't personally call him up for either one, but I think it's fine if he's around here. But just based on the fact that he's been called up for that one already, it should be Trusty. That's who we should be calling up. And for the striker position, assuming I'm really hopeful that Pepe's going to play, so that opens up a spot. I would say Captain America has to be here. I think that it would be immense for this group to have him around, and also immense for our wing because I think that Paredes showed at times it can be a little bit lackluster for him during games. So it'd be nice to have someone more consistent and that really values this competition like he does. So that brings it to an end, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comments down below any players that you think should be called up as the overage ones. Are you happy with this roster? What do you think about some of our opinions on these players right here? I think overall it's a really good roster, and also want to highlight props to Mitrovic. I think our team looks way more better drilled and trained than the A team, and that goes to show Greg's level. But that's talk for another video. So thank you so much. Make sure to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and we'll see you next time.